Cool. Welcome everyone. Thank you all for being here. This is the District 3 Supervisor debate. My name is Nick Ferris. I'm with the Telegraph Hill Dwellers who are sponsoring this event. We have about an hour and a half of content here, so we're going to jump straight into this. Want to acknowledge that there are two candidates for District 3 Supervisor that are not participating tonight. One candidate announced they were running earlier this week, and another is traveling today, unable to attend. Now, the rules and format for the debate are pretty simple. Our moderator, Lincoln Mitchell, will be running the show, so it's all on him, no pressure. Yeah, we're going to give an intro to Lincoln, so don't worry. There's going to be multiple opportunities to clap for him. So some rules. Candidates will have 90 seconds to respond to questions unless otherwise noted by our moderator. There's no interrupting each other. Each question will have one 60-second rebuttal at the discretion of our moderator. So one opportunity for a rebuttal per question by one candidate. We're going to begin with candidate opening remarks. Each candidate will have 90 seconds. We're then going to focus the first half of this debate on the issue that we believe is the most important issue facing our district and city today. It shouldn't be much of a surprise for anyone, and I'll let Lincoln introduce it. Following that, we're going to drill into an array of other key issues across our district, and we'll then conclude with 1-minute candidate closing remarks. Now, before we begin, I want to stop and thank all of our candidates for running. This is a very difficult task that all of you are undergoing. It's an extreme sacrifice, huge time commitment, both running for office and then, of course, to whoever is the winner. And it's certainly not for the money. And so we thank you all very much for running for supervisor. Also, to the candidates, I want to remind you all that this is a debate. We have over 200 voters and influencers here today. Many more will see this from our recording. They are donors, they are house party organizers, they are volunteers, and they all call this district home. We are expecting you to demonstrate how you differ versus each other. We expect to hear clear policy perspectives, and in turn, to identify differences you all have so that voters can leave today educated and in a position to support the candidate that most aligns with their beliefs. I wish you all good luck. Now, on that note, I'd like to introduce our esteemed moderator for this evening, Lincoln Mitchell. Lincoln teaches in the Political Science Department and the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. He grew up in San Francisco, went to college at UC Santa Cruz, and has written extensively about the city in several books, most notably San Francisco Year Zero, Political Upheaval, Punk Rock, and a third-place baseball team. For several years, Lincoln wrote a column in the San Francisco Examiner, and also written for numerous platforms including CNN, the New York Times, NBC, Foreign Policy, Foreign Affairs, and Reuters. You can follow his writings on San Francisco, baseball, and politics on his Substack, Kibitzing with Lincoln. We're very lucky to have Lincoln here. Thank you.
Nobody goes to a baseball game to see the umpire, and nobody goes to a debate to see the moderator. So that's the spirit in which I'm going to do my work tonight. I said nobody goes to a baseball game to see the umpire, nobody goes to a debate to watch the moderator, and that's the spirit in which I will moderate this event tonight. I'm not going to introduce the candidates because they will do that very, very shortly. We're going to begin with 60-second introduction, introduce yourselves, your candidacy. I want to just tell the candidates and the crowd that I am going to be hardline about time. We'll be holding up signs. 30 seconds. Time up. When you see that time up sign, stop. I will stop you if you don't stop. It is not respectful to each other or to the people who have taken the time to be here tonight if we don't do that, okay? So we're going to begin with 90-second introductions. And Mo, you're going to go first.
Good evening. Thank you, Lincoln. Thank you to the Telegraph Hill dwellers for organizing this wonderful event. My name is Mo Jamil. I'm a 10-year resident of District 3. I currently live on Russian Hill with my lovely wife Annie and my 2 children, Oliver and Kate. I am intimately familiar with every neighborhood in this district because I began as a leader of the Middle Polk Neighborhood Association and have, through the years, as we migrated to Russian Hill, became involved with the Russian Hill neighbors, and through that work have partnered with each and every neighborhood in this great special corner of San Francisco. I've also served for 10 years as a deputy city attorney under Dennis Herrera and our former supervisor David Chu, where I've had an opportunity to really understand the mechanics of city government and how our government works, its strengths, its shortcomings, and I look forward to informed discussion tonight with all of you and these other candidates here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon, we're going alphabetical order. So Sharon, you're going to be next.
Can we use this one? Can we? Yes? Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight. I'm Sharon Lai. I came to California when I was 16 from Hong Kong, where I grew up. I grew up in public housing, and that has really given me a big appreciation of the important role that government has in providing state. This is cutting out. Yeah, so I was sharing that I grew up in public housing, and that is what's been motivated me in this past 19 years of living and serving in the city to make sure that we are fighting for a city where families, working families, can stay and that our communities continue to be vibrant. Like I mentioned, housing insecurity is not foreign to me. I understand how hard it is when we cannot have our basic human need met. And that is why I am a very pro-housing candidate. And I, through that, it has led me to work like starting a nonprofit where I was building homeless housing, tiny home villages. I've worked on, Prop A under Supervisor Peskin there to make sure that we are making sure that there's financing to be able to produce housing at all income levels. I've worked as a commissioner on MTA, delivering public safety by tripling the budget and working on universal childcare, as well as making sure that we are right now recovering our economy by building in diversity. Thank you.
Okay. Jay Conner, thank you, Sharon. Jay Conner, you're up.
Well, good evening, everyone. I want to firstly thank you for moderating tonight's debate, and thank you for all those who were able to come out this evening to this debate. Finally, the weather has lightened up to where we can finally get outside again and enjoy San Francisco. But my name is Jay Conner B. Ortega. I have been formerly homeless for 20 years. I started off in a homeless shelter at age of 3 and worked my butt off to finally be able to have a home I call my own here in San Francisco. I currently manage a shop at the Westfield Mall, which currently sees so many different problems, the very same problems we all face in the city today. Homelessness, the drug crisis, stores closing, leaving our city. I face that every day when I have someone comes inside my shop, steal something, and my employees feel horrible because that's loss that we have towards our shop. That is not San Francisco values, to say the least. And over the past few years, we've seen the decline of our great city. The greatest city, I argue, in the entire world, because we are so compassionate, but it comes at a cost. So I'm running in this race to bring back our businesses, get the drug addicts into treatment, to solve this homelessness crisis, but also to have a safe San Francisco for all. Thank you.
Danny, you're up.
Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be here and see everyone. My name is Danny Sauter. I'm a candidate for District 3 Supervisor. We're all in this room tonight because we love San Francisco, and I don't have to tell you that the last few years have been really challenging. But we're here because we're committed to fixing this city. And I think as your next supervisor, you deserve someone who shares that commitment. Someone who's been in these neighborhoods for the past decade, working for our community. You know, people talk about the first moment that they got involved in local politics. And for me, it was, of all things, to start a farmer's market. I raised my hand 10 years ago in my neighborhood association to bring a farmer's market to the neighborhood. And as many of you know, it wasn't as easy as we thought. It was met by endless bureaucracy and delay. And so I had a choice to make at that moment. You know, do I run away from this broken system, or do I dig in and try to fix things? And I had a realization. You know, I thought, if we can't start a farmer's market in this city, how are we going to solve our real big challenges? I dug in, I committed to our communities, and for the past 10 years, that's been my focus and that's been my experience. During the pandemic, as restaurants were struggling, I started North Beach Delivers, supporting 40 restaurants with a free delivery service. Every day I work with our community centers like Telhai Neighborhood Center and Cameron House in Chinatown to serve thousands of youth and seniors. And yes, we got that farmer's market open 7 years ago, and it's been lovely to see so many of you there every Saturday morning. That's my record of neighborhood experience delivering for our communities, and I'm running to bring that experience now to City Hall. Thank you.
Thank you. Now that we know a little bit about the candidates and their backgrounds, we're going to start a kind of a lengthy discussion, I think, about housing. And I want to ask each of the candidates, and here you're going to have 3 minutes, which is a nice chunk of time, to really lay out your vision for housing in San Francisco. And you can define housing as broadly or as narrowly as you like. And we're going to stagger the alphabetical order. So this time, Sharon, you're going to go first.
Great. So, I mentioned that I'm a pro-housing candidate, and I say that to mean that I have devoted my entire adult career to working towards that. For a decade, I actually worked in planning department as city staff, protecting, advocating, upholding local zoning laws and things like neighborhood character. That's really integral, and I think that we are in this moment in time where that is being challenged. And my view is that we don't need to bulldoze the best and most unique parts of San Francisco in order to make room for growth. We know that we don't need to do that. And so, my perspective on housing is that we need to be producing more housing at every level. But more importantly, what markets cannot take care of are affordable housing. And that is the section of housing that we have never even come close to delivering based on the regional allocations. And every time that we've done this exercise, we've met the market rate housing. And I do know that we need to not stand in the way. They need to still produce market rate housing. However, the part that I'm most keenly focused on as your supervisor will be to ensure that we have a reasonable pathway to deliver all of the affordable housing that is needed. And just for comparison, that's over half of the allocation. And so that goes back to why I was such a staunch supporter of Prop A, why I went and spoke to groups, why I fundraised, why I mobilized, because if we don't have the financing, the gap financing to leverage, we cannot produce the affordable housing that we need. And when we say affordable housing, this is not just that is very, I think, dehumanizing. We have to understand that this housing actually goes towards supporting our workforce. That's our teachers. That's actually including me. When I used to be a city planner, I qualified for BMR housing. So these are people who are in our communities, who are trying to help keep our city going. And that is tied to the reason why we have departments that have huge amounts of vacancies and why our city is not running efficiently, because we have this bottleneck of not being able to fully staff our city departments even when it's fully funded. So to me, housing is a ladder. It includes people who are currently unsheltered. They need housing also, and that's why I during the pandemic started a nonprofit where I was experimenting and building, innovating on homeless housing, because if we don't stop that bleed, we won't be able to continue to make sure that we have a stable community. Thank you.
Okay, Jay Connor, you're next.
Housing is definitely a big issue in San Francisco. So in recent years, there is this big debate of what type of housing we want built in neighborhoods. And with this current, I'm sure many of you heard the whole NIMBY-YIMBY debate between you're either pro-housing or you're a NIMBY and you don't want any type of housing. The problem is, the question that I asked, and apparently no one at City Hall can answer to me, is who are we building housing for? Because we all talk about affordable housing. We all want affordable housing, but affordable for who exactly? And in recent days, there's been many projects proposed, especially in this district, about trying to turn empty parking lots into housing. And that's great. But at the same time, there must not be this need to constantly just be, if you don't like this project, you must just hate all types of housing. Or if you want this housing, you just don't like the neighborhood. That's a ridiculous argument to me and polarizing. So in District 6, there are so many buildings that are vacant and empty and not even filled. So whatever housing we build in the city has to be actually affordable and not just have the name slapped on it as affordable housing. So the concern also is to make sure we protect residents who currently live here versus trying to build a unit that's not going to be filled within the next couple of months as an expectation would be. So it's always about looking at the conditional use. Does it make sense to have this housing here? Can we fill this housing within this certain time period? If we can't fill it in this time period, that shouldn't be there. And District 3 and District 6 has always been the two districts that have been taking up all these housing projects, while the rest of the districts just go ahead and neglect their duty to the city itself to build housing. So my position on housing is this. We'll build housing, but we'll build it smartly and conditionally depending on where we're building it and who we're building it for. Because when we talk about the homeless in the city, we see, when we all walk out through San Francisco, we see that a lot of these people are drug addicted. And if the SIP hotels that the city try to do with their project has shown any idea of what it would look like, putting a drug addict in a home is not affordable housing whatsoever. And it's also not helping the problem either. So it goes back to, who are we building housing for? Is it something we can fill right away or in a couple of months? Because if not, if those answers are both no, then won't build it here. No problem. We can move it somewhere else. So that's my position on housing, is being very cautious to protect the community, but also to make sure we house people properly. So.
Thank you, Jay Connor. Danny, you are next.
So San Francisco needs more housing and District 3 needs more housing. Although we're the densest part of San Francisco already, that doesn't absolve us from doing more. Much of the housing in District 3, the housing that many of us probably live in, is now 100 years old. So we need to build for our next generation and to continue to build in District 3. And the good news is there's lots of places to do that to keep our neighborhoods intact. We can build housing in the empty retail spaces along Fisherman's Wharf. We can convert office buildings downtown to new residential buildings to bring back our downtown. We can build more housing in District 3. We have, over the past 10 years, an entire track record of proposals that have been stymied and stopped in this district. We need to look not further than just across the street at 659 Union Street, where it was 6 years ago this weekend, St. Patrick's Day, where that building burned out, and it's still there. That is unacceptable in the heart of our neighborhood to have a building still in that condition. It's dangerous. It should be rebuilt as quickly as possible. I've called and put out a plan for that to be rebuilt as affordable housing up above, and for that to be the central subway stop for North Beach Station down below. That needs to happen. We need to have forward-looking plans in District 3 for housing. But we also, as the leader on dense housing in San Francisco, have a message to tell to the rest of San Francisco, which is that character and density can live together. And in fact, I think they support one another. You think about the places that tourists come in San Francisco. They come to District 3. They come to Nob Hill, to Chinatown, to North Beach, to Russian Hill, and they come to our dense, vibrant neighborhoods. Those things exist together. We need to spread that message and make sure the rest of the city builds housing, that there's dense housing along Gary Boulevard, there's dense housing on Taraval. The rest of the city needs to do their part as well.
Thank you. Mo?
Thank you. The city's housing policies, led by Mayor London Breed, have absolutely failed the city and county of San Francisco, and they've failed the residents of District 3. We do not have a housing crisis. We have an affordability crisis. 99% of San Franciscans are currently housed. many of which are housed in rent control apartments. So any housing discussion needs to start with the 3 Ps, and I only heard one of them, which was production, by the other folks on this stage. We need to talk about protection and preservation. If you live in a rent-controlled apartment, we need to make sure that we protect those buildings from demolition. Mayor Breed and Mr. Sauter have supported several pieces of legislation and ballot measures that would make it easier to demolish rent-controlled housing without a hearing. That is unacceptable, and that cannot happen. We also need to talk about preservation. The best affordable housing is the affordable housing we have. I've met so many tenants who have lived in their apartments for 20, 30, 40 years. These people have lived their lives in San Francisco, and we owe it to them to protect them. With respect to that preservation, I was proud to support Prop A. 70% of the voters supported Prop A. I was disappointed that only 10% of Prop A will be set aside for the acquisition of existing housing. I think the best way to preserve affordable housing is to take housing off the speculative market. And as rent-controlled buildings become available, we should be looking for ways to buy them and have community land trusts manage them so that when those tenants age out, we can have housing for police officers, firefighters, teachers. That is the type of housing that San Franciscans need. I was also deeply saddened today to hear that Mayor Breed vetoed a piece of legislation which would have prevented buildings 3 times the height limit in the Northeast Waterfront Historic District and the Jackson Square Historic District. Now look, we can build housing. We can build housing within our existing height limits. We can build housing with meaningful community output. We don't need to roll out the red carpet and allow developers to build 3 times the height limit with, to quote my friend Lori Brook, views from the Fair Lawns to Mount Diablo. We know that those units will not be occupied. We know that there's a global speculative market for those units, and that is not housing. And we need to start getting real about that.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So we're going to stay on housing, but we're going to change the format. So I want to just introduce the format. I'm going to ask a question. Each of you will get 90 seconds to respond to that question. One of you, chosen by me, will get 60 seconds to rebut, if, for example, if your position was attacked or something like that. We're going to go through a few. Everybody will get one of those 60-second chunks. We're not going to pick on any one person or anything like that. And Mo, I want to drill for this question, and this question, it's going to go to you, Jay Connor, first, and then just been Mo. The question is this. Mo, you said something that I want to flesh out a little bit. We don't have a housing crisis. We have an affordability crisis, which... And some people would say that. Some people would say, look, the city's population is stable, maybe it's even declining. What's the housing crisis? Others would say, of course, there's a housing crisis. And I want to maybe add a part 2 to that, which you can address one or both, or hopefully at least one of these, which is building more units of housing a housing policy or a planning policy? Is it a policy to address a need, or is it a policy to craft a new vision of the city with a larger population and different feel and all of that kind of thing? So you're going to have 90 seconds for your response. Jay Connor, you can go first.
So in terms of our housing policy, it's the planning policy really than the housing policy, because we all know that we can build houses day and night wherever we want to do. It's just a matter of making sure we keep San Francisco's integrity, because we aren't the world's largest city like Los Angeles where we can spread out wherever we want to. So it's making sure we keep everything secure and safe for everybody in the city. Because it's very true that the buildings in the District 3 are significantly old, and we do need to make the most needed impact of fixing these buildings, but at the same time making sure we're not just bulldozing the entire city at the same time. And to answer the other question, it's also a matter of, if you walk throughout District 6, and as someone who follows me online and you see all my maps I map out of all the different vacancies in District 3, We need to fill these units before we even consider trying to add more units that are going to sit empty in the city. I've found at least 50 on one street that has empty rooms after room, rooms for rent. So it goes back to the fact that it's affordability. Landlords are not able to find people because people feel unsafe coming to San Francisco, especially with our headlines every single day on San Francisco's problematic 1, San Francisco's problematic 2. So it's a matter of trying to make sure we stabilize rent for people to want to come back to San Francisco, but also to clean up San Francisco. Because no one's going to move into a city where they feel very unsafe, and especially like all of us, the rate that we pay for our housing in some cases, we should be walking on gold in some cases. So, my position.
Thank you. Danny, you're up.
And I apologize, on the format, would you repeat the second question?
So the second part of the question is this a housing policy we're talking about, or is it a planning policy to really a new vision for San Francisco as a much larger, more densely populated city, rather than to solve an existing problem of people not having a place to live?
Sure. I think it's a housing policy and it's an affordability policy. I mean, there's been studies that show in the Mission, for example, the buildings being built there, 80% of the new residents are existing San Franciscans. We're building for San Franciscans. This is not building for people to come in and attracting and trying to grow as a city. We're building for our existing residents in San Francisco and in the Bay Area. And it's really disappointing to hear that we're being, that my competitor, Mr. Jamil, is proposing that we continue down the same track that we've been in for the past few decades, that we're saying we're only going to support housing if we like it, and we're only going to support housing if it pleases us. We need a radically different approach where we're actually pro-housing as a city. And let me be very clear, as a tenant and as someone who would be only the second renter on the Board of Supervisors, I am pro-tenant, and I will fight for more housing as I fight to protect tenants in San Francisco. I will fight for more housing as I protect our tenants in Chinatown SROs. That will always be my priority.
As it happens, Mo, you're up next.
Thank you. 2022 Prop D, promoted by the mayor on the ballot. Look it up. It allowed the demolition of rent control without a public hearing. The latest mayor's legislation around housing constraints allowed demolition of rent control without a hearing. This is happening, folks. We need to pay attention because we've demolished neighborhoods before. The Western Addition, the Fillmore, Japantown. It could happen again, and we need to fight back. This is an urbanist agenda. This is not housing, right? This is a fundamental vision of changing San Francisco. It's changing San Francisco in a way that's anti-family. It's if you drive, you're a bad person. It's bringing an unchecked urbanism to fundamentally change the city that we love. And the reason why San Francisco is special is because everyone in this room loves their neighborhood. They love going to their cafe, they love going to their corner store, they love the people and the stories of those neighborhoods and their small businesses. We don't need to turn Fisherman's Wharf into Miami Beach. We don't need to turn Ocean Beach into Miami Beach. We need to preserve what keeps San Francisco special. As you drive across the Golden Gate, you look at our beautiful city, that needs to be protected. And that's what's gonna drive tourism here. That's what's going to serve the existing residents here, and that's what's going to serve the next generation.
Thank you. I think this is a really important question, but also an interesting one. I actually have the view that production of housing is both a housing policy question as well as a planning policy question, perhaps necessitated by housing policy. I think that for us to only talk about supply is definitely not the right approach. There has to be preservation, there has to be tenant protections. Those are the best tools for anti-displacement that we have. But included in that should be housing subsidies, because it's not just about building housing or even building affordable housing, having the capital to do the production, but it's also to make sure that people on the demand side have the ability to afford the units that are out there. And to Jay Connor's point, that's why we see vacancies out there, because the product that's out there actually can't be afforded by people. And that is why I have this vision of housing production that has to be holistic, that has to both provide supply side as well as demand side solutions. And that's why I think it's really important for us to have a citywide and regional view about housing. It cannot just be on the backs of a single supervisor. As we all know, it's a board of 11. You got to get at least 5 of your colleagues to stand with you to pass any legislation. And I think it's really important for us to lean in on collaboration in a moment like this in order to get even bigger things achieved, like the regional housing bond measure that we are looking at in November that could potentially give us over $1 billion.
So, Jay Connor, I'm going to ask this one to you. I mean, you have 60 seconds as kind of a rebuttal to some of the things other people have said. There's a lot of discussion about preserving. We've heard that word from a few people here. How does a member of the Board of Supervisors or a city governor or a mayor, how do we decide what to preserve and what not? How should we make those decisions?
The question should be reframed to, who are we preserving? We're preserving our longtime residents of San Francisco. We're preserving the people who come here not just to shop as tourists, but who invest in the city in so many different ways. That's who we're preserving, and that's when the mayor and the board of supervisors should take in consideration of who we're trying to preserve in the city of San Francisco. Now, don't get me wrong, I love our tourists, and I'm so glad they can come to the city, but the tourists are not coming here to live. Hopefully we can get them to come here to live, but until then, our focus is on people who live here every day. Thank you.
Thank you. And that goes back to that. And so now we're going to continue another housing question. Danny, you're going to be first this time. The question is, do you support the current proposal to upzone most commercial corridors in the city? And kind of part B to that, what should the height limits be, in this district?
Yeah. I think the context here is really important. Right now, our city is undergoing a citywide rezoning plan, and this is part of our housing element, which is a process that the state has mandated. And the state has basically told us, you've got to make room and you've got to make plans, serious plans for 82,000 new units of housing in the next 10 years. And if you don't, then we're going to remove all local control and we're going to remove your funding. So we would lose affordable housing funding, transit funding, and anyone could build anything anywhere. So we've got to be serious about actually putting forward a plan that is realistic and that is authentic. And that is right now kind of where we are in the process and where the back and forth is with the Board of Supervisors. But as I shared earlier, yes, absolutely, the entire city has to do its part. For most of the last 20 years, our housing has been constrained at the east side, particularly the southeast side. And I'm really encouraged that the new proposals are saying that the west side of the city has to do more and can do more. If you think about the west side, it's incredibly high resource. We have fantastic schools, hospitals, good transit connections. So I'm really encouraged that there are calls for additional height and additional density on the west side. The current proposals have a little bit of increase in District 3 as well. And I think that has to be part of the conversation. If we're doing additional height increases, it's going to make room for more neighbors. Mr. Jamil talked about the character of our neighborhoods and the people that provide for our neighborhoods. Those people need to live somewhere, and additional height and additional density makes room for that.
Thank you. Mo, you're up next.
Thank you. I think what we need to understand is that housing and land use discussions need to be part of the democratic process. We need to bring neighbors and businesses in the room and have a dialogue about community planning, have a dialogue about what our neighborhoods are going to look like. The one-size-fits-all approach from Mayor Breed and our allies in Sacramento is deeply offensive. It's deeply offensive to folks like myself. When I served as the president of Middle Polk Neighborhood Association, we actually sat down with the community and developers and said, hey, we're supportive of housing within height limits, but we need community benefits. We want the BMR to be built on site. We want to make sure that neighborhood-serving businesses are coming in. That is a true planning process. And that's what needs to happen on the west side. You can't just show up to neighborhoods that are established single-family neighborhoods and say, you know what, the way that you live, the way that you've raised your family, the way that you have your grandkids come over, that's wrong. We know what's best for you. Take your medicine and like it. I talked to former planning commissioner Mike Antonini, a conservative, and he basically told me, and I read his letter, I thought it was very thoughtful. He said, we should have a diversity of density in San Francisco. And I believe that. And I think we need a bottom-up, community-led process to meet the needs of the city.
Sharon.
So I mentioned having been a planner before. I have also actually produced, developed, and approved thousands of housing units in San Francisco as part of my work on commissions, working in the private sector and nonprofit sectors. And I can tell you that, developing along transit corridors or commercial corridors, that does make a lot of typology sense. But what I am not in support of is the current attempts to essentially erode our historic parts of the city. Only 1% of the city is actually zoned as landmark districts, including the waterfront area that is currently under question. I mean, the point of living in a beautiful city that has rich culture and rich fabric and rich history is about these historic districts. And I am not at all in support of demolishing and eroding that history just to make way for some development. There's plenty of other places to do that. We only have 13 of these districts and we need to hold on to them. So I'm really in support of developing more housing. I agree with the current direction of making sure that we look at equity and making sure that the burden of managed development is also shared on the west side of the city. The historic part of the development has always been on the east side, and partly that's from the history of redlining. So in order for us to really come to terms of what it means to be an inclusive and equitable city, we have to continue to push for development on the west side.
Okay, and Jay Connor? Has everyone spoken to this? Yes, good. Okay, Sharon, I'm going to ask you a follow-up, or you could rebut something that anyone else said, however you want to play it. But a number of people discussed the role of community in here. You spoke about having worked on these projects a lot. What should the role of community be? How much community input should there be? When is it too much? What are your thoughts on that?
I think what's too much is the sludge that is the process, the permitting process. We could absolutely save time and streamline all of that to make valuable and critical space for community input. We are a community that welcomes voices, and we should not be taking that away from what we deserve. Everybody needs to have a voice at the table, and that is partly why I'm here. I'm representing, the only Asian candidate here. Chinatown has not had an API representative in a very long time, and it's really important for us to have that voice, similarly to other communities as well. I want to address the fact that, talking about transit in replacing basically a mixed-use location, although valuable, I want to caution that we need to look at feasibility, and when we look at building in expensive infrastructure, we really need to look at the impact on small business, because I don't want other neighborhoods in D3 to have to suffer through what Chinatown had to for Central Subway.
Thank you. This next question, I want to bring this question we just asked, or you all just discussed, a little bit back to this district very specifically. And my question is, would you support future upzoning of Columbus Avenue, Grant Avenue, and Chinatown? And Mo, we're going to start with you.
So in 1968, the Fontana Towers went up, and in the several years thereafter, several high-rises shot up in Russian Hill. And the Telegraph Hill dwellers and the Russian Hill Improvement Association and others got together and they said, you know what, in our beautiful city, we should have a 40-foot height limit. And that came into place in 1972. And it existed and has been fine. And San Francisco has thrived. We do not need to disturb the 40-foot height limit in North Beach, in Chinatown, in any part of District 3. And frankly, I defer to the neighborhood and community leaders in other parts of the city because I believe in neighborhood self-determination for them to step forward and say they want. And in November, in addition to this race, we need to elect a new mayor who will fight for us.
Sharon, your turn.
Well, I spoke about preserving historic districts already. There's really only 1% of the city that falls within that category. That includes Telegraph Hill, that includes Jackson. I do think that some managed growth is appropriate. I'm not against revisiting the 40-foot height limit. I think that is actually too low in some cases. But I will say that it needs to involve the community. And I'll give you an example. Chinatown is not one of those places that's against growth. In fact, we're right now trying to do special use district rezoning in order for a 17-story, I believe, apartment building to go up, and that's going to be 100% affordable, and I fully support that. But that has to include community at the table. That is what the community wants. It's the kind of housing that we need in that district in order to be able to continue to move everyone out of SROs. So I do think that some height increases should be considered, but that needs to go through a robust planning process that engages everyone who's affected. It cannot be jammed down our throats like some of those projects that try to sneak their way through recently. I don't support that at all. As a planner, we believe in outreach, we believe in public engagement, and I am going to be somebody who's going to ensure that everyone is engaged in the process.
Thank you. Jay Conner, your turn.
I think it's fine as it is already. I mean, I walk through Russian Hill, I go through North Beach, and I go through Nob Hill and all the different neighborhoods, and I see it's fantastic. We've seen, like, it goes back to the points that were made this evening, is we've seen what happened to District 6 with all these high rises that can't be filled, and this is not just a couple of floors. These are plenty of floors that can't be filled. And I don't want to see that same thing happen to our great district in District 3. Because like we said before, this is a historic district. We have all the icons here. And the one thing I don't want to see happen is walk next to an icon and see a high rise that has so many empty floors. It's ridiculous to me. But it also goes back to the fact that when we just get rid of these restrictions, and I'm against certain restrictions, but not all restrictions, we go into this whole polarization of, well, if we get rid of any requirements of a certain height, we can just build to the moon as far as I'm concerned. And that's the craziness we see today with certain developers that want to do that. So it's fine as it is. I'm fine with it.
Okay, and Danny, you take the track of this?
I just want to say, I think it is deeply alarming that we have two candidates here who say it is fine for us to be in the 50th year of a crushing housing crisis. This is a housing crisis that has pushed out tens of thousands of middle-class, low renters in San Francisco. So I think it's deeply alarming, and we need to be serious. When we say a housing crisis, we need to actually meet the moment with action and talk about building additional housing. Now, when we talk about density and height increases, I think we've got to talk about that in return for more affordability, and I think that's what things like the state density bonus plans have been doing. Now, specifically, I've already talked about areas in District 3 where there should be more housing, should be more density along Bay Street, downtown into Fisherman's Wharf. I think that's where we'll get the most bang for our buck with additional housing and density in San Francisco and in District 3.
Okay. Mo, I'll maybe give you a chance to respond to some of the things you said, because you advocated strongly for the height limits. Danny seems to be suggesting that creates a housing shortage, if I'm interpreting that correctly, or contributes to, maybe is a better way to say that. So what are your thoughts, Mo?
I'd love to respond to that. There are tens of thousands of unbuilt units in our inventory. I believe in partnering to get that inventory unstuck. One of the first things I think I would do would give a call to Matt Dorsey and say, let's reopen the Central Soma plan, which basically opened the door to expansion of our downtown. Say, well, why don't we do housing in that area instead of building more office space when the world has changed post-COVID? I find it also deeply alarming that no other candidate here will condemn the housing policies of Mayor Breed. It is clear in every piece of legislation that there is not historic preservation protections. Only through the hard work of the community and our current supervisor have those protections been reinserted in every piece of legislation. I know that because I've read every one of them and fought that fight.
Thank you. So last question on housing, which I'm sure is pleasing some of you. Sharon, you can have the first crack at this. Then we will move on to other substantive questions, but how would you protect against the displacement of vulnerable tenants and small businesses in the district and, of course, around the city?
I think that does have to do with having local control, and I think that's why it's so dangerous right now that the state is effectively taking over our authority. And I'll say that I've studied, I'm a policy person, I love that stuff, so I've looked into a lot of this detail. And I've studied places like states like Vermont where they only have state zoning, and that has not at all solved their housing affordability or housing supply issue. So I'm not at all convinced that that is the path that we want to be on. I think that at the local level, as I mentioned, I'm a big supporter of housing subsidies, voucher programs, making sure that we have strong tenant protections in place, including rent control. I think on the small business side, we do so much. We have so much programming on helping new businesses. We're not doing enough to help existing businesses to stay open. We need to make sure that the burden on them has to be reassessed. Right now, sometimes, illegal street vendors have fewer hurdles to jump through than the legal operations, and that's why it's making businesses so hard, and we need to make sure that that is being addressed adequately. I'll also say that I am a fan of thinking through more programs, expanding programs like the small site acquisition that we have on the residential side, and looking at whether or not we can actually provide more security, land security for commercial tenants, for commercial uses, so that they're not exposed to rent increases like they are right now.
Okay, Jay Connor?
Can you remind me of the question?
The question is, how would you protect against the displacement of vulnerable tenants as well as small businesses? How would you protect against the displacement of vulnerable tenants and small businesses? I couldn't say that in the mic.
Well, what we're doing right now by making sure we don't have that, well, firstly, I want to say it's not outrageous to protect current residents here in San Francisco. So I want to make that very clear. But what we're doing now is currently protecting residents by making sure we don't just slab a brand new building right next door to them and increasing the rent, because we do have rent control. But in this day and age where things are so unpredictable, who knows what the next design of buildings will have when it comes to legislation. And I agree, I am glad that there's legislation right now that protects us from our current supervisor. But right now, with the mayor vetoing that legislation, let's see what the current supervisor does in terms of that. Does he override the veto, or does he go ahead and continue to let it stand? So I'm quite eager, but in terms of making sure we continue to protect our residencies, it is bringing back small businesses and staying on that course while protecting and refusing to build obscene amount of buildings in District 3. Thank you.
Okay,
Dan?
Well, this is a deeply personal question to me as someone who's rented in District 3, rented in North Beach for the last 10 years. So you have my commitment that I will always protect rent control. I will work to strengthen all the protections around owner move-ins. And the other thing I think that's really important to talk about as we think about the intersection, because there is an intersection between housing and homelessness, is making sure that we fully fund our eviction lawyers. So if anyone in this city, no matter their circumstances, no matter their means, if they are facing an eviction, the city should provide an eviction lawyer for them to make sure that the stakes are fair and that they get a fair trial, because that is a really smart investment. Otherwise, we risk putting people out on the streets. We risk putting people into a cycle of homelessness. So doing that preventive working at the intersection of housing and homelessness, funding eviction lawyers, expanding emergency rental vouchers so that we prevent people from having to leave our neighborhoods, or worse, having to be on our streets.
Okay, and Mo. Thank you.
It's easy to talk the talk, but you got to walk the walk. When I was president of the Middle Polk Neighborhood Association, I got a call from my friend Mike Pirillo, who owns the Jug Shop, 3-generation-old legacy business. And he said, Mo, I'm going to lose my business. My property's up for sale. And I said, Mike, let's put our heads together. Let's figure this out. You got to use the tools we got. We knew it was a soft site. We knew it was going to be housing. So we called the brokers. We said, look, find a developer who will work with the community. Find a developer that'll give the Jug Shop a permanent home. And J.S. Sullivan built a building there, market rate housing. We got some affordable on site, and we got a permanent home for the Jug Shop. You got to use the tools we got. Whether you're a neighborhood leader or you're a supervisor or you're the mayor, you have to play within the rules you have. And you have to do the work for your small businesses, and you have to be checking in with them. You gotta be walking the corridors. That's what I've been doing for 10 years, building relationships with merchants in North Beach, merchants on Polk Street, merchants in Chinatown. You need to have your ear to the ground. It's easy to have keyboard courage and go on Twitter all day and blast people, right? But you actually need to do the work.
I'm going to give Danny a quick follow-up here. You can kind of follow up to anything anyone said, but one thing, if you get a chance in the 60 seconds, it seems to me that based on what we know about the history of San Francisco and everywhere, when you build new buildings, people have to move. And that is displacement. When we talk about small businesses, that's also residential tenants. How do we square that circle? But you can respond to.
Yeah. Well, I don't think those have to be at odds. I mean, a lot of the examples that I gave this evening are specific to District 3 in places where we have underutilized land. You know, I talked about the fact that we've got a burned out building across the street, and that should be housing and transit. I talked about the fact that we've had now, look, I've been the president of my neighborhood association, I've been the chair of my planning and zoning committee. We've seen in the last 10 years many projects proposed in North Beach, but most of those proposals never get anywhere because they're not embraced by the community. And so because of that, we have vacant sites at Bay and Columbus, the old Tower Annex site. We have vacant parking lots at Broadway and Montgomery. So there is plenty of land in District 3 to actually build housing, to bring in new small businesses, and to do that without displacement.
Okay, so everyone take a deep breath because we're moving away from housing, like it or not. And Jay Connor, this question is for you, and it is, but everyone will answer it. You're going to go first. It's the same format, 90 seconds each. One person I'm going to give a 60-second response to. Jay Connor, what is your position, this is for everybody, on the current policy regarding formula retail, that's 11 stores or more, in North Beach and other neighborhood commercial districts in District 3? Do you support or oppose it, and what measures related to that would you do to protect the small businesses here in D3?
Well, thank you for that question. The one truly big aspect I love about North Beach specifically, especially when it comes down to Chinatown and Fisherman's Wharf, is you see a lot of family-owned businesses that were made here in San Francisco. They are not necessarily commercial businesses, but at the same time, we do need commercial businesses. So I support only supporting two minimum commercial businesses. So for example, Walgreens. We'll put 2 Walgreens in a neighborhood and that's it. I definitely want to start encouraging San Francisco-made businesses, because every single day I meet people who have an idea, who want to start their business, who have so much passion, and to see them fall apart at the idea that there is no guidance for them to how to do that process. I want to see that happen. I want to see them have their own brand new businesses, especially in Columbus. I want to have businesses that are empty currently filled up. I even want to see businesses that burnt down turn into more shops that we have available to us. Bring back the tourists, because I've met a couple of tourists who walk around and wonder what's left in San Francisco, because they see the constant empty storefronts. So that is my position on that, is to limit how many commercial businesses can come in, but at the same time encouraging homemade businesses in San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you. Danny, your turn.
Yeah, I think the best example of this was a few years ago on Grand Avenue, where El Farolito tried to come to the neighborhood. And just because that was their 11th location, this law treated this family-owned taqueria, Bay Area run, the exact same as Taco Bell. And I think that was a glaring example of how this law is no longer working. So I organized a petition. We got 2,000 signatures to make sure that El Farolito could actually come into the neighborhood. I think this needs to be modified. It doesn't need to be modified in a way to let Starbucks in or let Taco Bell in. Let's be very clear about it. But do you raise the cap from 10 to 15? Do you allow a conditional use? Do you allow Bay Area businesses to have a higher cap? There's got to be a conversation about that, because this is a law that's been in place for the last 15, 20 years. Many parts of it are still working and need to be protected, but as we have incredible vacancies, particularly along Polk Street, still along Columbus and Grant, we need to be open to revisiting these sorts of things while protecting our neighborhood.
Thank you. Mo?
El Farolito could have been totally avoided if Mr. Sauter and others had contacted the planners and worked to get the correct interpretation of the planning code, which ultimately the bureaucrats figured out to get El Farolito open, and you can go there and have a burrito there today. I support the formula retail ban in North Beach. I support the chain store controls across the city. And I'll tell you a funny story about the chain store controls. There was a hearing at the Planning Commission, and there was 2 applications back to back. One was for Blue Bottle in the Lower Haight, and hundreds of people came out because Blue Bottle thought, hey, we're a local business, this will be easy, we got it in the bag. They did no outreach. Hundreds of people came out to say no to Blue Bottle. And Blue Bottle was shot down. By the way, Blue Bottle is now owned by Nestle. So Blue Bottle was shot down in the Lower Haight, hundreds of people left. Rich Hillis, who at the time was on the Planning Commission, the next application was for Starbucks in Cow Hollow. Nobody showed up. Rich said, hey, Starbucks, how would you like to open in the Lower Haight? How would that go down? Starbucks was approved to expand on Union Street. Every neighborhood has a different attitude towards formula retail. It's the restrictions have worked in North Beach, they've worked in other places. I think we do need to take a look, and I'd love to work with other supervisors on Market Street. I think there was some thought on, I'll stop.
Thank you, Mo. Shannon?
Well, North Beach, we have such a special gem here. It is one of the neighborhoods with the lowest vacancy rate, and that is for good reason. It's because we have unique neighborhood legacy businesses, and we need to continue to protect them. If it's not broken, why fix it, right? Like, I think the formula retail controls here are really working. It's working in our favor, and we need to protect that. Having said that, there is a place for formula retail. Some commercial corridors or some commercial clusters need that anchor. We have to also understand, though, when you bring in a national chain, and by the way, Walgreens is not clamoring to be to have 2 locations in the same neighborhood right now, but we also run a risk of these companies making their decisions of whether to stay or not based on numbers. So when we have an economic shock like we did, they very quickly moved out. That's why I really believe in having a clear strategy, neighborhood by neighborhood, commercial strategy, in looking at how do we balance what is needed in terms of bringing in the uniqueness of that neighborhood, bringing in the small businesses that will actually be committed to stay in the long run, and in some cases, like Westfield Mall or Stonestown or all over Financial District, actually formula retail, I'm fine with that. But it needs to be dependent on the context and what is the need of that economic driver in that location.
Thank you. And Mo, I'd like to give you a chance to weigh in here on anything that was said, but perhaps one thing, if you can't do anything else, is your concern about formula retail economic? Is it something else? What's driving that?
It is economics. Zoning is all about economics. If you open the door to formula retail and chain stores in North Beach, it will push up the rents of the existing businesses. Yeah. And what will happen is those businesses will have to close. Look, many people have criticized unfairly our zoning controls, but let me tell you, they work. And all you need to do is walk outside and see how North Beach is booming right now. We've created a wonderful ecosystem here in North Beach, and that's been, by the way, championed by organizations such as the Telegraph Hill Dwellers and others. This is a community-led effort. If the neighborhood organizations have a different view on any sensible policy, then they should engage with me as the supervisor, and we can have a discussion about that. But I think that these controls are working, and we should keep them in place.
So the next question, and Danny, this is coming to you first, so if you want to fudge the time a little bit and start with something else, you may. What is your vision for Columbus Avenue, specifically? And for my Columbia students, that's this diagonal street here, it's not the one next to Central Park West. Do you support red lanes for bikes and buses? Do you support congestion pricing? What is your view on that?
I first want to say I appreciate your praise for the community process, because I was really proud to lead the effort in 2017, where I brought together 3 neighborhood groups who don't always work together, when we, if you remember, had a 25% vacancy rate in North Beach. And we went out and we actually went door to door on all these vacancies, and we put forward a plan, a roadmap with 5 suggestions of what needed to be changed in our neighborhood to bring back small businesses. And many of those things were implemented and they're working. And now the rest of the city is jealous of North Beach because we're doing really well. We've had our renaissance. It's because we leaned into what made North Beach great, which is the neighborhood businesses. It is the music out in the streets. It's the parklets. It's the dining. And that was a community process that brought us there. I want us to do the same along Polk Street next. For Columbus Avenue. Columbus Avenue needs to be cleaner, it needs to be safer, it needs to be greener. It is a tight amount of space there. You know it as you walk down the sidewalks there. So we're going to have to make compromise. Do we expand the sidewalks? Do we give more rooms to buses? Do we do more parking? That's the conversations we'll have to have. But I do think that Columbus Avenue needs, again, to be greener, cleaner, and safer.
Mo.
I don't, the MTA seems to break everything they touch. If you look at Valencia Street, if you look at Taravel, again, it goes back to the urbanist agenda, right? We do not need red lanes on Columbus Avenue. And furthermore, we do not need to redesign Kearny Street. Okay, my father's 91 years old, lives in San Jose. I go to visit him. Coming back into the city, moving along 101, and you just sit on traffic on 3rd Street because they've removed one lane of traffic for buses and bicycles, and we do need to speed up transit, but to make people sit, people who are trying to get to work, people trying to go get their kids around school, to just make them sit in unbearable traffic to privilege other forms of transit is wrong. And I think I'm glad that red lane doesn't cross into on the D3 side of Kearny, and we need to fight to protect that.
Thank you. Sharon.
Yeah, so Columbus Avenue is one of the most iconic streets that we have in the city. And, I do believe in making sure that we can share the street effectively across the city. We need to make space for every mode of transportation. Like my family, we use the bus, we use the train, we run, we walk, we bike, we do everything. We use the car because I have 2 little kids, and it's pretty impossible to get them across town without a car sometimes. But what cannot happen is we cannot try to fit all modes of transportation all in the same space all at once. That is just not effective. And the other thing I don't like about the approach of planning in the city is piecemealing. And we do a lot of that, including bike lanes, right? We talk about them one at a time instead of looking at it as a network. And I do think we need to have a safe bike network, but that does not belong on Columbus, where the 30 bus and the 8 is already, traversing it. And by the way, the 8AXBX, which is something I advocate strongly to bring back during the pandemic, connects our Bayview neighborhoods throughout our D3 neighborhoods. We need to continue to make sure that our streets, like Columbus, is a supported roadway where we are continuing to bring neighborhoods together instead of making it harder for us to share the road. So, having said that, I also, I think some folks on this panel are supportive of bringing the Central Subway all the way to the water, and I think that is something we need to very seriously look at because the cost of it.
Danny, I'm going to give you 60 seconds here. And what I would like you to do, if you can do whatever you want, but I'd like you to do at least a little bit is be more specific about Columbus Avenue. And specifically around congestion pricing as well.
Yeah. I don't think congestion pricing on Columbus Avenue makes sense. That was something that was looked at for downtown years ago, and all those studies were done at a time when it was a completely different city. So I don't think that's part of the future of Columbus Avenue. The future, I think, is as I said. I mean, it's very specifically, it's the fact that the medians have dying trees and the medians have weeds. It's those small things. I mean, that's kind of the perspective I've seen as as someone who here in this very neighborhood has been organizing monthly street cleanups for the last 8 years. Seeing the fact that we need to have a little TLC of our streetscapes and our landscapes, to plant more street trees, to improve those medians on Columbus Avenue. And again, I mean, it was discussed already. This is a tight space. There's going to have to be trade-offs. And I think we have to, look at adjacent streets like Powell Street and Grant Avenue and see exactly where the different modes of transit fit.
Thank you. Okay, so this question, we're going to begin with Mo. And this is a question that's near and dear to my heart because of a project I've been working on with some of my students, or they've been working on it, I've been kind of kibitzing. Some people, like the mayor and others, have proposals for downtown that are not. Some people, like the mayor and others, have proposals for what to do about downtown that are frankly not grounded in reality. So this includes a UC campus descending from the heavens and 30,000 undergraduates showing up. It includes, a soccer stadium which wouldn't create problems for traffic, and and in fairness, I'm a baseball fan. But so the question is this, Mo. Within the construct of reality, and I really want to stress that, what is your vision for the future of downtown?
So downtown has gone through many iterations. One of my favorite vintages of downtown San Francisco was the 1920s and 1930s vintage. And if you look at all those beautiful historic buildings which have smaller floor plates, which have an ability to be converted with state, federal, historic preservation tax credits. I'm not saying we could do it for every building, but if we can pick out a couple to convert and adaptively reuse using the legislation sponsored by President Peskin and signed by the mayor, I think that would start to change things. Like I said, downtown is now not only just north of the financial district. Downtown, in my estimation, stretches all the way to Mission Bay. And we need to reconceptualize that downtown, like I said, by reopening the Central Soma plan, converting some of those office developments to housing, and really building a 21st century, 24-hour downtown. I want to fully support the efforts of Robbie Silver and the downtown CBD, of Marissa and the Union Square BID, and look to them who are on the ground, who have the ideas. I think in the Eastern Neighborhoods Plan,
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. Sharon, you're up.
We can get it faster. This is actually an area of work that I currently work on, so I feel very passionate about it. And the reason why I care so much about downtown is because that is the main economic driver for us in terms of taxes, and if we can't fix that, we're not going to be able to continue to fund everything that we need, such as clean streets, such as firefighters, such as police officers. We just need to make sure that our economy is stable. So the first thing is, I already touched on this, it needs to be clean and safe. I was attacked before, and so personal safety is a really big personal issue for me, and that is actually the number one issue why employees are not returning to downtown and why employers don't want to move back in. So we have to take care of that. Second thing is, I envision a downtown where we are going to be a diversified industry, no longer just about tech and AI. I know they're going to be here, that's fine. But we need to make sure that we're diversifying our economic base so that we are resilient. We need to ensure that we are extending into green economies and making sure that we're bringing in jobs in industries that will stay and jobs that will not be outsourced. That is super important. Third thing is we have to build demand. And demand, by that I mean daytime and evening time demand. So daytime demand, we have to, like we already talked about, making sure that we are bringing daytime visitors back. We are bringing activation back through programming, but also through strategy and how do we attract those daytime users. But nighttime, we have to ensure that we're building in the residential uses.
Thank you. Jay Kahn.
It's actually quite funny because I was working today in downtown at the Westfield Mall, so I see the chaos that goes on every single day. And on my way here, I watched as this person was screaming at themselves in a window reflection. So something that the candidates have not mentioned is cleaning up downtown. making it easier for businesses to come back by cutting red tape, by cutting all these extra unnecessary fees that the city hall just wastes anyway. It goes down the drain. We also need to make sure that when we are cleaning up this downtown, we also make it vibrant. We have pop-up shops. We make sure that people who are street vending are doing it legally, to make sure they're not selling stolen product. We need to shut down retail theft, which I actually do have a radical idea for that. But it's actually, instead of just talking about building up downtown, we have to first fix the problems of downtown that the city has neglected for a very long time, which, like I said before, getting these addicts into treatment, making it easier for businesses to open up. And my radical idea when it comes to retail theft, which is rampant downtown, is by every person who's caught stealing something, we will fine them as a city that equal amount and pay that amount back to the small business they stole from. Because there's no reason why we should fine people who steal, watch it go back down the drain, and not reinvest it back in the businesses they stole from.
Danny.
I think the future of downtown has more residents. The downtown core right now only has 315 residents. It should have thousands. We can get it to thousands within the next 5 years. I think the future of downtown as a foundation has to be clean. It has to be safe. I mean, we have to be honest with the fact that we have a problem with the narrative right now in San Francisco, both for tourists and for workers. So when a tourist comes or when a worker's returning to office more, we've got to disrupt that narrative. You know, we have to have them say, hey, actually it was okay. It was pretty clean, it was pretty safe, I feel good about it. I'm gonna come in 4 days a week instead of 3 days a week. But the other thing is we need to give everyone in this room, frankly, more reasons to go downtown. We've got to diversify what we do downtown and the types of events and activities that we have downtown, and so much of that can be short-term activations. It's things like more night markets downtown. It's things like new plazas downtown filled with music and arts. It's things like entertainment zones on Front Street, so you can actually grab a beer and go walk out into the street and enjoy a St. Patrick's Day concert that's going to happen this weekend at Harrington. So that's the future of downtown. It's going to be more of a mixed-use space. It's going to be a diversity of use, and it's incredibly important that we get it right because downtown funds our neighborhoods. It funds our neighborhood services. So we've got to be serious. I still think we're underreacting to the crisis downtown in our city.
Okay, so Sharon, I'm going to give you 60 seconds to either remark on someone else said or to answer my question, which is how do we get from here to there?
I love the fact that we're all talking about delivering housing, but I'm really the only candidate here who's actually ever developed any soups to nuts, right? Including financing, approvals, construction, and occupancy. I do want this vision of making sure that we can convert downtown underutilized, the 37% vacancy rate that we have into housing. The reality is a lot of these buildings, it's just not going to be financially feasible, right? So yes, removing approval hurdles is part of it, and I'm so glad that Supervisor Peskin led that effort. But it's going to take a lot more than that to make that a reality. And I am very excited about President Biden's package where he's actually talking about low interest loans and subsidies, and we're going to need those financial tools in order to make it feasible. Because it's not about the zoning or the entitlement approvals anymore. It's really about the financial market.
Thank you. This is our last question, then we're going to wrap up so we're around the 7th inning stretch now. And Jay Connor, we're going to ask you to start with this one. And Danny, you alluded to this. Some of you may have read in the newspaper, or maybe on the internet. Some of you may have read or seen on social media that there's a discourse around San Francisco and crime, and there also is problems of crime, and there is an enormous homelessness crisis, and there are problems of drug overdoses. What do you think we should do about this?
An easy question.
Well, it's not a false narrative as people try to claim as it is, because if you go downtown, you even walk through Chinatown, you can see the actual evidence on the actual streets. You see the tents, you see the addicts who are screaming at someone, you see the people shooting up in the little alleyways and the little crevices between buildings and empty storefronts. So it's a really big concern we have in San Francisco. All the shops we have talked to are closing down, especially at the Westfield, say that it's theft. People come in to steal. People feel emboldened to steal. There was even an article done, I believe, by the Chronicle where kids are now stealing and selling it in the Tenderloin. This is a problem, and when tourists come here, that's the very narrative they take back to where they came from, which scares everybody. It even scares me as a resident that this is being talked about. When I travel to New York, all I hear is San Francisco is doomed. All I hear is the stores are halfly empty because people steal, and it's horrible. Now, we do need an SFPD actually on the streets. We need an SFPD that's fully funded, that's fully staffed, and even though that one of the candidates here today, I won't mention him, but he's next to Mo, he has called upon defunding the police by $120 million, even stating that's not gone far enough. Well, we've seen what the reality is when we did as a city defund SFPD. Chaos in the streets. Officers decide it's no longer safe for them to be a police officer. And as someone who's been at the police commission countless times to push back on these legislations and restrictions, which I'm so glad we got Prop E passed. So,
Thank you. Danny, I think he was alluding to you.
So I think we need to hire more police officers. I believe everyone on this stage supports that position. We know we're 500 police officers short. That means that we're 50 or 60 officers short here at Central each and every single day. And as we do that recruitment, I think we need to keep in mind to make sure that these are folks who are going to be champions of our community, are going to protect our communities. That means targeted recruitment to make sure that we have more Cantonese-speaking police officers to serve our communities like Chinatown, to make sure that we have officers who know that coming to work for SFPD means you're going to be out in the neighborhoods, building relationships with merchants and with our residents, and not sitting behind the desk or driving a car around all day. It's going to be about being out here in the neighborhood. And we've got to do short-term things too, because that recruitment, it's a national crisis, it's a national shortage. That recruitment's going to take time. We have to do more with our existing resources. Let me give you two specific examples. Right now, Central Station serves about 80% of District 3. The supervisor districts and the police districts have different boundaries. That makes no sense. It makes communication and coordination really difficult. So as we redraw our police district lines, they need to be matching our lines of our supervisor boundaries. The other thing is we need to keep our captains longer. You know, where we've been in a situation where in the last 6 years we've had 5 different police captains here at Central Station. So just as we start to get to know them, they're on to the next thing. We need to actually have incentives to keep those in command here, to build those relationships. That's what makes the community safer.
Okay, thank you. Mo.
Thank you. Police and public safety starts with the top. It starts with the mayor and the city departments, and I would like to partner with whoever is the mayor after I join the board to make sure that we create a positive narrative of San Francisco. We need to be going out and fighting for our city. We all came to this city and fell in love with the city at one moment in time, and we need to sell our city, right? We can't celebrate that we had the lowest COVID death rates and then run for the hills when the times get bad, right? We need to face our problems, and we need to, work with our police department. But police is not the only solution. They're part of the solution. We need a real economic development. When department heads aren't performing, there needs to be consequences. And I've worked with my friends in the Lower Nob Hill Neighborhood Alliance. They're working their tail off to get resources for that part of District 3, right? And that part of District 3 is hammered by the toothpaste coming out of the tube of the Tenderloin. Unfortunately, the mayor took her eye off the Tenderloin, took her eye off the drug dealers on the street, took her eye off all these problems, and they've spread into Lower Nob Hill. And what we need to do is really get serious about solving those problems. When I've talked to retired police officers, they said back in the day, the command staff gave the captains a lot of discretion. They said, here's your resources, you know the best way to allocate them to the district, and go.
Sharon.
So crime is not something, and homelessness also, drugs, all of these social issues that you've mentioned is not single dimension. It touches so many city departments, which is why it's really important as the future supervisor here that we know how to lean on collaboration and know enough about government to be able to work effectively across all of the city functions to make sure that we're adhering to good government practices and removing those hurdles. I'll give you an example. When I was running the homeless nonprofit, I think everybody in this room is very educated and knows that it takes years to develop something in the city. I was able to get permits for building tiny homes in 2 weeks and started construction, was able to move people in just 2 months. We have to make sure that we're addressing issues in the urgency that it really is, and we need to make sure that we understand how to navigate and bring people together so that we're not creating more hurdles for ourselves. We need to be working across multiple departments, making sure that there's coordination in order to deliver things ahead of schedule and quickly so that we can get our city back on track. The other thing I'll highlight is when I was on the NPA, other than tripling the public safety budget, one of the important things I worked on was rebuilding relationships with our SFPD department. Because when I joined, they were in such bad terms that they didn't even want to share crime data that affected our transit lines. Well, if we're not talking to one another and not sharing information, how could we expect to be working well together?
And Jay Connor, you're going to give you 60 seconds, and you can respond to anything anyone said. But the question I would ask you is that I see that crime, drugs, and homelessness are partial but not completely overlapping categories, which in my mind would then require partial but not completely overlapping solutions and approaches. So maybe you can speak to that, or something someone else said.
Well, firstly, one of the candidates who responded earlier had stated on camera that he said, more cops does not mean more safety, which I think is preposterous as we've seen on the streets of San Francisco. But a lot of the individuals here who are in the streets have been proven to be from out of San Francisco. They come here because we offer the cheapest addictive drugs on the streets. They are not here homeless because they can't afford a home in San Francisco. They're here because they're here trying to get drugs. So my proposal is, when it comes to overlapping, is taking care of people who are homeless because they can't afford pricing in San Francisco, and getting addicts who are clean and sending them back to where they came from. Unless, of course, they would decide to stay here and contribute to the local economy. But until then, we have to clean up the streets of San Francisco.
All right, and so take a deep breath, because we're done with I think the hard part. We're going to do a lightning round, and the way we're going to do a lightning round, just to keep it moving, is we're just going to go down the row. These are questions. You have 3 words. We don't have a hyphen policy. 3 words, but they're not long. They're easy questions. But so the first question, starting here. How long have you lived in the district?
2+ years.
I couldn't hear them.
How long have you lived in the district?
19 years in San Francisco, last year in District 3.
Oh, how many words?
How many years have you lived in the district? 3 words.
In the district.
Or fewer?
1 year.
1 year.
10 years.
10 years.
Okay. Do you support a vacancy tax on empty storefronts? This should be just a yes or no.
Yes.
Yes.
It doesn't matter. Go.
Yes.
Large landlords,
I'm
yes.
sorry?
Large landlords, yes. Not on small landlords.
Large landlords, yes, that's 3 words.
Yes.
So I was recently, I mentioned I was a baseball fan. I was visiting the Negro League Museum in Kansas City. I was recently visiting the Negro League Museum in Kansas City. I'm kind of an obsessive baseball fan. This is a fantastic museum if you ever get there. Kansas City, as you know, has a reputation as the most radical city in the United States. It's really the People's Republic of Kansas City. It's a whole kind of Maoist setup there. They have free buses. The buses are free in Kansas City. Should buses be free in San Francisco?
They already are.
Can I just say already are? It's 3 words. Already are.
Can't afford it.
For specific groups.
No. Thank you, everybody. Okay. So I'm from the Richmond, and the answer for me to this question is Min's Vietnamese on Clement around 3rd. What's the best place that used to be here in the district that you miss the most?
L'Osteria del Forno.
Good. You want to run?
That little toy shop.
Okay.
Turtle Tower.
I miss the trap.
John T. at Jack's.
Okay. And the current person who's the person who is currently holds elected office in the city of San Francisco who you admire most.
Nancy Pelosi.
7 supporters. I have
You said 2 words, good.
Supervisor Ingardio.
President Aaron Peskin.
The last one is an easy one. 3 words or less. Should the city take positions on issues of global importance?
No.
it depends.
Rarely.
It depends.
Okay. Mike, back down. So I don't know. I don't vote in this district, and I don't know who's going to win. But I've never worked or seen a group of candidates who've been follow the rules so well. So I really mean that. So I want to, before we get into closing statements, and I know this elections get nasty, but really this has been an absolute pleasure, much easier than I was told it would be. So now, each of you get 60-second closing remarks, and we're going to begin with Jay Connor again at 60 seconds closing remarks.
It is true. I do not have the same governmental experience that my fellow opponents do have, but unfortunately, as part of the same experience that's led us into the ground we see today. But the experience that I have that none of these candidates can say is I've been on the grounds with the small business owners. I understand how a business works and operates. I'm formerly homeless. I understand the homelessness crisis, the difference between a person who's homeless and can't afford versus someone who's on the streets addicted to drugs. I definitely am that person. Now, 100% I am the underdog in this race because of my fellow candidates indeed, but I am living proof that we can turn things around, that no matter how bleak life can get, you can always turn things around. And that's what I love about San Francisco, because we always turn things around. And as your supervisor, I will be there on the streets, talking to every single resident in our district. We agree or disagree, no matter what. Tell me what you agree with, tell me what you disagree with, and as a Down Jones person, I will be there with you.
Danny is next.
Thanks for sticking with us and thanks for showing up tonight. I think, if you've been listening along, it's clear we have great challenges in our city. These are going to be difficult years ahead, but I also do have hope because I see things that are working in our neighborhood, and I see the amazing people in our neighborhoods, the amazing organizations in our neighborhoods are doing that work. And I see it as my role to bring that experience in District 3 and what's working in District 3 to City Hall. I see answers all around this district. I see answers on homelessness with the work that North Beach Citizens is doing. I see answers to attracting tourism by expanding the Central Subway to unite our D3 neighborhoods. I see answers to supporting small businesses with the Chinatown night markets from B Chinatown, the street fairs from the North Beach Business Association, answers to supporting our seniors, the most seniors of any district in San Francisco, with working with our neighborhood groups like Next Village and Tel High. That's the experience that I have. That's what I'll bring to City Hall and to this office. Thank you.
Thank you. Mo, you're next.
Well, it's been an honor and a privilege to speak with you all, and I want to thank the Telegraph Hill dwellers as well as many other friends here from other neighborhood associations. San Francisco is a beautiful place, but it's a beautiful place because of all of you and all the neighborhood advocacy that has fought to keep San Francisco a great place. And we are under threat. There are forces in Sacramento and in this city that will destroy our city for the pursuit of private profit. And we need to be on guard and fighting. And I will be a supervisor who leads the fight for the neighborhoods to preserve this city, preserve it for everyone, for families like myself, raising 2 kids in this city. I want more people to be able to raise kids in this city. I want the city to think about us. I want the city to think about all the different small businesses that are out there that are struggling every day to make it. This election, in this race and in other races, gives you an opportunity to let your voice be heard. Thank you.
And Sharon, you get the last substantive word. You get the last substantive word.
Last but not least, so thank you again for Telegraph Hill Dwellers for putting this together, and every one of you for spending your valuable time with us tonight. It's been really fun. I think we heard a lot from everyone here who wants change. There's not a lack of will here. Things are too hard, and it shouldn't be that hard. But this race isn't about the will to make sure that we have vibrant communities, that our working families can stay here, not just for my kids' generation, but for my grandkids' generation. It's about who here has the skills to also deliver the change that we need. As somebody who's devoted my 19 years of track record to San Francisco, working across stakeholder groups, working across sectors, this puts me in a unique position, and I am very proud to bring a very diverse set of supporters citywide as well as locally within the district, across different industries, including labor leaders, educators. Time's up. Thank you.
Thank you for everybody. I'm turn it back over to you, but I just want to thank our candidates. I want to thank the Telegraph Hill Dwellers for inviting me and for putting this together. Our timekeeper, whose name I don't remember, but you were, Kristen, you were the real star of the show. And it's really extraordinary that so many of you showed up for an election that's so many months away. This really speaks to an extraordinary civic engagement, which is also part of what makes this a great city and a great district. Thank you.
So Tuesday, November 5th is Election Day. We're way out. It's a great time to get involved with one of these candidates. So really urge you to do that. And on that note, we have to thank our moderator, Lincoln Mitchell, please. And thank you all for coming. Have a great night.